It was an unusually quiet afternoon in the small suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped softly in the distance, and a faint breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak tree in Mrs. Eleanor Turner's front yard. Eleanor, a widowed woman in her late 70s, sat in her favorite armchair by the window, knitting a scarf for her granddaughter. Life had slowed down for her over the years, but she found comfort in the simplicity of her routine. Her home, a quaint two-story cottage with white shutters and ivy climbing the brick walls, had been her sanctuary for decades. It had seen her through joyful moments, like raising her children, and heartbreaking ones, like saying goodbye to her husband. Now, it was a quiet retreat, filled with memories and a faint scent of lavender, her favorite. As Eleanor looped the yarn through her needles, she suddenly heard an unexpected sound, a soft knock at the front door. Startled, she paused. It wasn't common for her to have visitors, especially on a weekday afternoon. Her family usually called ahead, and neighbors typically stopped by only on weekends. She rose from her chair, steadying herself with the help of her cane. As she approached the door, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of curiosity mixed with unease. Peering through the peephole, she was surprised to see two small figures standing on her porch. They were children, no older than 6 or 7, dressed in worn but clean clothes. Eleanor opened the door cautiously, her motherly instincts immediately kicking in. The little faces staring up at her belonged to a pair of identical twins, a boy and a girl. Their deep brown eyes held a mix of nervousness and determination. "Hello there," Eleanor said kindly, her voice carrying a warmth that she hoped would put them at ease. "Can I help you?" The twins exchanged a glance before the boy stepped forward, clutching his sister's hand tightly. "We're sorry to bother you, ma'am," he began, his voice soft but steady. "But we really need to talk to you. It's important." Eleanor knelt slightly, her curiosity growing. "Are you lost? Do you need help finding your parents?" she asked, concern lacing her words. The girl shook her head, her pigtails bouncing with emotion. "No, we know where we are," she said quietly. "We came here on purpose." This admission puzzled Eleanor. She couldn't recall ever seeing these children before, and they certainly didn't look like any of the kids in the neighborhood. "Well, why don't you come inside?" she offered, stepping aside to let them in. The twins hesitated for a moment, glancing at each other again, as if confirming a silent agreement. Then, hand in hand, they stepped across the threshold. Inside, Eleanor led them to the cozy living room, where the warm light of the afternoon sun streamed through the curtains. She offered them a seat on the couch and went to the kitchen to fetch some cookies and milk. As she returned, she noticed how small and vulnerable they seemed, perched on the edge of the sofa, their hands clasped tightly together. "So," Eleanor said, sitting down across from them, "why don't you start by telling me your names?" "I'm Marcus," the boy said, his voice still trembling slightly. "And I'm Maya," the girl added, her gaze fixed on Eleanor with an intensity that seemed far too mature for her young age. "Well, Marcus and Maya," Eleanor said gently, "what brings you here? You said it was important." Marcus looked down at his lap, then at his sister, who gave him a small nod of encouragement. Taking a deep breath, he said something that made Eleanor freeze. "You're the only one who can help us," he began. "You knew our mom." Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She frowned, her mind racing. "Your mom," she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't think I know who you mean." But before she could say anything more, Maya reached into her little backpack and pulled out a faded photograph. She held it out to Eleanor, her tiny hand trembling. The picture was old, its edges frayed and its colors faded with time. But Eleanor recognized the woman in it instantly. Her breath caught in her throat as memories she had long buried threatened to resurface. "That's impossible," Eleanor murmured, her eyes darting between the photo and the twins. How do you have this?" Marcus spoke again, his voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. "Because she's our mom, and she told us to find you." Eleanor stared at the children, her world suddenly spinning. The room seemed to close in around her as a wave of emotions she couldn't quite name washed over her. "She said you would know what to do," Maya added, her voice breaking. "She said you're the only one who could help us." And just like that, Eleanor's quiet, predictable life was upended. Who were these children, and how were they connected to the woman in the photograph? Eleanor's mind raced. She didn't know what they were talking about, but one thing was clear. She wasn't about to hand over anything or anyone. With the twins clinging to her, Eleanor stepped in front of them, her voice steady despite her fear. "You'll have to go through me first." The stranger tilted their head, a small smile playing on their lips. "That can be arranged." And just like that, the tension broke into chaos. Caleb lunged at the intruder, shouting for Eleanor to run. She grabbed the twins and bolted down the stairs, her mind focused on one thing: keeping them safe. As she reached the front door, sirens blared in the distance. Help was finally on its way. But deep down, Eleanor knew this wasn't the end. Whatever Marie had left behind, whatever secrets she had been running from, they were far from over. And as the sirens grew louder, Eleanor realized one thing with chilling certainty. She wasn't just protecting the twins from the past, she was now a part of it. The next hours were a blur for Eleanor. The police arrived just in time to pull her and the twins out of the chaos, and Caleb, who had fought off the intruder, was taken into custody for questioning. The house, which once felt like a sanctuary, was now swarming with officers combing through every corner for evidence. Eleanor sat in the police car with the twins, her arms wrapped tightly around them as they trembled, exhausted from the ordeal. She watched Caleb being led into another car, his face unreadable. Before he climbed in, he looked back at her, his eyes full of unspoken urgency. Eleanor realized she didn't know whether to trust him or not. He had risked his life for them, but his connection to Marie's mysterious past left too many unanswered questions. She felt torn between gratitude and suspicion. The officer in charge, a middle-aged man with a firm but kind demeanor, approached her after some time. "Miss Hathaway," he began, his voice calm but serious, "we've secured your house for the night. You and the kids will be safe, but we'd like to move you to a secure location just to be sure. Whoever broke in tonight is part of something bigger, and we need more time to understand what's going on." Eleanor nodded, her mind spinning. "What about Caleb?" she asked hesitantly. "He helped us. He said he was trying to protect the kids." The officer frowned. "We're looking into his story. Right now, he's cooperating, but there are holes in what he's told us. If you remember anything else about what happened tonight, or what he said, it could help us piece this together." Eleanor swallowed hard and looked at the twins. Maya had fallen asleep against her shoulder, and Marcus was staring out the window, lost in thought. "I'll tell you everything I know," she said quietly. They were taken to a hotel on the edge of town under police supervision. Eleanor tucked the twins into bed, kissing their foreheads and whispering reassurances she wasn't sure she believed herself. When they finally drifted off, she sat by the window, staring out at the dark parking lot below. The weight of the night pressed down on her. She couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that whoever had come for them would be back. The next morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of her phone buzzing. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello." "Eleanor." Caleb's voice came through the line, low and urgent. "I don't have much time. They're letting me go, but I need you to listen to me carefully." Her pulse quickened. "How did you get this number?" "That doesn't matter," he said. "What matters is that you're running out of time. They won't stop until they get what they're looking for. Marie trusted you with something they believe is hidden with the twins. Think, Eleanor, did she leave anything with you? A key, a box, a message? Anything?" Eleanor's mind raced. "No, nothing," she said, her voice shaking. "She just sent me the kids and that letter. But the letter's gone. It disappeared the night you showed up." There was a pause on the other end, then Caleb sighed. "The letter was a clue," he said. "It had to be. Marie would have hidden it in plain sight. Think about it. Where would she leave something important?" Eleanor's breath caught as a memory surfaced. Marie's childhood home. The house where it had all started. The house, she whispered. It has to be there. I thought so too, Caleb said. But I didn't find anything when I searched it. Maybe we missed something. They'll be watching it now. But if you want to protect those kids, you need to find whatever she left behind. Before she could respond, the line went dead. Eleanor stared at the phone, her hands trembling. Caleb's warning echoed in her mind. Whatever Marie had hidden, it was the key to ending this nightmare. Eleanor spent the day thinking about how to approach the situation. By evening, she made a decision. She couldn't involve the police yet. They didn't fully. She looked up at the twins, who were watching her anxiously. They didn't seem to understand the full gravity of the situation, but their mother's words had clearly left an impression on them. I don't know what your mom meant, Eleanor said honestly, but I'll do my best to help you. I promise. Marcus and Maya both nodded, their expressions a mixture of relief and uncertainty. But as Eleanor sat there, the note still clutched in her hands, a knot of unease formed in her stomach. There was more to this than Marie's passing. She could feel it. Something wasn't adding up. Marie's sudden reappearance in her life, even through her children, felt like the opening of a door Eleanor had long since bolted shut, and the mention of forgiveness, it hinted at secrets, at truths buried in the past. Eleanor glanced at the twins again. They were so young, so innocent. They didn't deserve to carry whatever weight Marie had left behind. Have you eaten? Eleanor asked, her voice softening. Are you hungry? Maya nodded timidly. A little, she admitted. Well, let's fix that, Eleanor said, forcing a smile. You can't think straight on an empty stomach. She led the children to the kitchen, her mind racing as she prepared sandwiches and poured glasses of milk. She watched them eat, their small hands clutching the sandwiches as though they hadn't had a proper meal in days. As they ate, Eleanor's mind wandered back to the note, to the photograph, to the memories she had tried so hard to forget. What had happened to Marie after their falling out? How had her life unfolded? And why, after all these years, had she chosen Eleanor to care for her children? Eleanor didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. The twins were here now, and they needed her. Whatever secrets Marie had left behind, Eleanor would have to uncover them, one way or another. But deep down, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that her old friend's death was only the beginning of the story. The night settled quietly over Eleanor's home, casting long shadows across the living room as the soft hum of the heater filled the silence. The twins had fallen asleep on the couch, their small bodies curled under the quilt she had draped over them. She couldn't help but watch them for a moment, their faces peaceful, so unlike the weight they seemed to carry when awake. But Eleanor's own peace was fleeting. She sat in her armchair, the note still clutched in her hand, her thoughts spinning in an endless loop. Marie's words lingered like an echo in her mind. Forgive me, it wasn't just the children's presence that unsettled her. It was the sudden resurfacing of a friendship she had thought was long dead. Eleanor couldn't sleep. Instead, she found herself in the small room she called her study, where boxes of old keepsakes were stacked neatly along the walls. She hadn't opened most of them in years. Somewhere in there, she knew, were traces of her friendship with Marie, letters, photographs, fragments of the past. She pulled one of the boxes down, her fingers brushing against the dusty lid. When she opened it, the scent of old paper and faded memories hit her. It was all there. Polaroid photos of her and Marie laughing in front of a carnival Ferris wheel, birthday cards with inside jokes scribbled in the margins, a stack of letters written in Marie's familiar handwriting. Eleanor unfolded one of the letters, her heart tightening as she read the words. Marie's voice came alive in her mind. Ellie, you're the only person who really gets me. I don't know what I'd do without you. Sometimes I feel like you're the sister I was supposed to have. Promise me we'll always be this close, no matter what. Love you forever, Marie. The words stung more than Eleanor cared to admit. They had promised, hadn't they? To always be there for each other. And yet, here she was, piecing together the life of a woman who had once been her whole world, but had become little more than a stranger. The sound of footsteps pulled Eleanor from her thoughts. She turned to see Marcus standing in the doorway, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. He shook his head and stepped into the room, his small frame dwarfed by the towering shelves and cluttered desk. "What are you doing?" Eleanor hesitated, unsure how much to say. "Just looking at some old things," she said finally. "Things from when your mom and I were young." Marcus tilted his head, curiosity flickering in his eyes. "You and Mom were friends for a long time, weren't you?" "We were," Eleanor said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "She was like family to me." "Then why didn't you see her anymore?" he asked, the question innocent but piercing. Eleanor's breath caught. How could she explain something she'd barely understood herself? "Sometimes, when people grow older, life takes them in different directions," she said carefully. "It doesn't mean they stop caring about each other." Marcus seemed to accept this, though the look on his face suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied. He wandered over to the box and picked up one of the Polaroids, studying it closely. "You looked happy," he said quietly. "We were," Eleanor replied, a pang of guilt twisting in her chest. Marcus sat down beside her, the photograph still in his hands. "Mom used to talk about you sometimes," he said. "Not a lot, but when she did, it was like you were someone really important to her." Eleanor swallowed the lump in her throat. "She was important to me too," she said softly. "Then why didn't you come back?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with a sadness far beyond his years. Eleanor looked at him, her heart breaking a little more. How could she tell this boy that the woman he adored had once broken her heart? That their friendship had ended in a storm of accusations and misunderstandings that neither of them had been brave enough to fix? Before she could answer, Marcus spoke again. "I think she wanted to fix it," he said, almost as if he had read her mind. "She told us that sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too, that it's never too late to say sorry." Eleanor felt her chest tighten. Was that what this was? A final attempt at reconciliation, delivered through the only people Marie trusted. The weight of it all pressed down on her, and she realized just how much she owed to the woman who was no longer here to explain herself. "Marcus," she said gently, "your mom loved you and your sister very much. I don't know why she chose me to take care of you, but I promise I'll do my best. We'll figure this out together, okay?" The boy nodded, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Okay," he whispered. As he climbed back into bed a few minutes later, Eleanor returned to the study, her mind spinning with unanswered questions. What had happened to Marie in the years they'd been apart? Why had she kept Eleanor's name alive in her children's minds? And what was it that Marie had needed forgiveness for? The next morning, Eleanor decided to make some phone calls. If there was anyone who might know more about Marie's life in recent years, it would be her neighbors. She started with the woman who had been taking care of the twins before they arrived at Eleanor's doorstep. "Oh, those poor kids," the neighbor, Mrs. Jenkins, said over the phone. "I tried my best to help, but I'm getting too old to take care of children full-time." "I understand," Eleanor said. "Did Marie ever talk to you about me?" "Not directly," Mrs. Jenkins admitted, "but I remember her mentioning you once or twice. She always spoke about you like you were someone special. She said you were the kind of friend who would do anything for the people you loved." Eleanor felt a pang of guilt at the words. Did she ever talk about her past? Or why she didn't have any family to help with the children? Mrs. Jenkins paused, as if debating how much to say. "Marie was private," she said finally, "but there were times she seemed worried, like she was afraid of something or someone. I don't know what it was, but it was clear she carried a lot on her shoulders." "Afraid," Eleanor repeated, her stomach twisting. Did she ever say what she was afraid of? "No," Mrs. Jenkins said, "but I think whatever it was, it's why she wanted you to have the children. She trusted you, Eleanor, even after all these years." Eleanor thanked her and hung up, her mind racing. The idea that Marie had been afraid of something, or someone, sent a chill down her spine. Had Marie been running from something, hiding? And if so, what danger might still be out there, lingering like a shadow over Marcus and Maya? Eleanor glanced at the twins, who were playing quietly in the living room. They deserved answers, but more importantly, they deserved safety. Whatever secrets Marie had taken to her grave, Eleanor was determined to uncover them. She looked at the photograph again, her finger tracing the edges of Marie's smiling face. Somewhere in the past, buried beneath years of pain and silence, lay the truth, and Eleanor knew that if she was going to protect these children, she would have to confront it, even if it meant reopening old wounds. The following days were anything but ordinary for Eleanor. She fell into a delicate rhythm of caring for Marcus and Maya, making meals, tidying up after their play, and ensuring they felt safe. But the unanswered questions surrounding Marie gnawed at her constantly. Every smile from the children, every little giggle, was a reminder of the weight she now carried. These weren't just two kids dropped on her doorstep. They were the key to something bigger, something Marie hadn't, face obscured in shadow. Eleanor's heart thundered in her chest. "Who are you?" she demanded, though her voice betrayed her fear. The man didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, his movements calm, almost calculated. Eleanor backed away, her mind racing. She didn't know what this was, but every instinct told her to run. Clutching the letter, she turned and bolted for the window, her pulse pounding in her ears. The man didn't chase her, but his presence lingered in her mind long after she had climbed back through the window and sprinted home. By the time Eleanor locked her front door behind her, she was shaking. The twins were still asleep, blissfully unaware of the fear that gripped her. Eleanor sat down at the kitchen table, the letter spread out in front of her. She read it again, her mind racing with possibilities. What had Marie been running from? And who was the man in the house? The questions swirled in her mind, each one more urgent than the last. She couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had haunted Marie wasn't just a ghost from the past. It was something real, something dangerous, and it was far from over. Eleanor looked at the twins, sleeping peacefully on the couch. Whatever this was, she would protect them. She had to. But the weight of Marie's secrets pressed down on her like a storm cloud, and Eleanor knew the worst was yet to come. Eleanor barely slept that night, the letter and the shadowy man from the house looping in her mind, like a haunting melody she couldn't silence. She sat by the window, watching the street outside for hours, her nerves frayed with the feeling that someone, or something, was watching her. Every creak of the house, every flicker of movement outside, sent her heart racing. But the street remained eerily quiet, the stillness heavy with unspoken tension. The next morning, Eleanor tried to push the events of the previous night to the back of her mind, focusing instead on the twins. She prepared their breakfast and helped them get dressed, but she couldn't ignore the way Marcus was studying her. His dark eyes seemed to notice everything, even the things she wasn't saying. "Did something happen last night?" he finally asked, his voice soft but direct. Eleanor hesitated, not wanting to burden him with the truth. "I just couldn't sleep, that's all," she said, forcing a smile she didn't feel. Marcus didn't seem convinced, but he didn't push. Instead, he sat quietly, stirring his cereal while Maya chatted about a dream she'd had, blissfully unaware of the weight in the room. It wasn't until later that day, when Eleanor was tidying up, that she noticed something strange. She had left Marie's letter on the kitchen table the night before, but now it was gone. She searched the entire kitchen, her anxiety growing with each passing moment, but it was nowhere to be found. "Marcus, Maya," she called out, trying to keep her voice steady. "Did either of you see the piece of paper I left on the table?" The twins looked at each other, and Eleanor caught the fleeting glance Marcus gave his sister. It was subtle, but enough to tell her they knew something. "I saw it," Marcus admitted after a pause, "but I didn't take it." "Did you see anyone else near it?" Eleanor pressed, her stomach tightening. Marcus hesitated, and for a moment, Eleanor thought he might lie. But then he looked her straight in the eye and said, "It wasn't a person. It was the wind." The back door opened by itself. Eleanor froze. The back door. She knew she had locked it the night before, she always did. The thought that someone might have entered her home while she and the children were sleeping sent a chill down her spine. She walked to the back door, her hands trembling as she tested the lock. It was secure now, but the unease lingered. Who had taken the letter, and why? Later that afternoon, Eleanor decided to call the police. She felt uneasy about reporting something she couldn't fully explain, but the sight of the man in Marie's old house and now the missing letter were too much to ignore. When the officer arrived, he was polite but skeptical as she recounted the events. "So, you saw a man in the abandoned house," he repeated, scribbling notes in his pad. "And now you think someone entered your home and took a letter." "I don't think someone entered," Eleanor said firmly. "The door was locked last night, and now it's gone. I know it sounds strange, but—" The officer held up a hand. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, ma'am, but without more evidence, there's not much we can do. You said the house belonged to someone you knew." Eleanor nodded. "It was my friend's childhood home. She passed away recently. Her kids are staying with me now." The officer jotted something down. "It's possible it was just a drifter," he said. "Those old houses tend to attract people looking for shelter." "Could be coincidence," the officer said, closing his notebook. "But if you notice anything else, give us a call." He left shortly after, and Eleanor felt more alone than ever. That evening, Eleanor decided to revisit Marie's old house. She didn't want to bring the twins, but she couldn't shake the feeling that the answers she needed were there, waiting for her. After making sure Marcus and Maya was settled and safe, she drove to the edge of town, her grip tight on the steering wheel. The house looked even more desolate in the fading light, its boarded-up windows like hollow eyes watching her approach. She parked a block away and made her way cautiously to the property, her footsteps crunching on the overgrown grass. As she stepped closer, she noticed something she hadn't before, a faint glow coming from one of the upstairs windows. Her breath caught. Was someone inside? Eleanor's heart pounded as she crept toward the house. She had no plan, no idea what she would do if she found someone inside, but the pull to uncover the truth was stronger than her fear. She found the same window she had pried open the night before, slipping inside with practiced ease. The house was dark and quiet, the faint smell of mildew still lingering in the air. She made her way toward the staircase, the wood creaking beneath her weight. The glow from upstairs flickered like candlelight, casting shifting shadows across the walls. As Eleanor reached the top of the stairs, she paused, her breath hitching. The glow was coming from a room at the end of the hall, the door slightly ajar. She pushed it open slowly, her hands trembling. The room was empty except for a single candle sitting on the floor, its flame dancing in the still air. But it wasn't the candle that caught her attention, it was the writing on the walls. Messages scrawled in a hurried hand covered every surface, the words overlapping in a chaotic tangle. Asterisk, I tried to stop them. Asterisk, asterisk, they're watching. Asterisk, asterisk, the children are in danger. Asterisk. Eleanor's pulse thundered in her ears as she stepped closer, her eyes scanning the messages. One phrase, written in bold, uneven letters, stood out above the rest. Asterisk, Kalina, you have to protect them. Asterisk. Her knees buckled, and she clutched the wall for support. Whoever had written this knew her name. Knew about Marcus and Maya, and they were warning her. A sound behind her made her spin around, her heart leaping into her throat. It was faint, like the shuffle of footsteps, but it was enough to send her into a panic. She grabbed the candle and rushed out of the room, her mind racing. As she descended the stairs, the air seemed to thicken, the house closing in around her. She burst out through the same window she had entered, running to her car without looking back. When she finally made it home, she locked every door and window, her hands shaking uncontrollably. The twins were asleep on the couch, their faces peaceful and unaware of the danger that seemed to loom closer with every passing moment. Elena sat at the kitchen table, the weight of everything crushing down on her. Marie's letter, the man at the house, the writing on the walls, it was all connected. She didn't know how, but one thing was certain: someone out there knew the truth. And whoever they weren't finished yet. The night was heavier than any Eleanor had experienced before. The weight of the warnings, the eerie messages on the walls, and the missing letter sat in her chest like a stone. Every shadow in her home felt alive, every sound amplified in the stillness. The twins slept soundly upstairs, oblivious to the storm Eleanor was trying to make sense of. She sat at the kitchen table, the candle from the house flickering in front of her. She didn't know why she'd brought it back, but something about its warm glow was oddly grounding. She thought back to the writing on the walls. Asterisk, Eleanor, you have to protect them. Asterisk, it wasn't just a warning. It felt personal, as though whoever had written it had known her for years. But how? And what were they protecting Marcus and Maya from? She rubbed her temples, frustration bubbling as the pieces refused to fit together. A sudden noise jolted her. It was faint, but unmistakable, the creak of the front door. Eleanor froze, her heart hammering. She reached for the nearest thing she could use as a weapon, a heavy ceramic vase, and crept toward the door. The living room was dark, the only light coming from the faint moonlight streaming through the curtains. Her breath hitched when she noticed the front door was ajar, swinging slightly as though someone had just stepped through. "Who's there?" Eleanor called out, her voice trembling but firm. There was no response, but then she heard it, footsteps upstairs. Her blood ran cold. The twins. Eleanor's fear turned to urgency as she darted up the stairs, the vase gripped tightly in her hands. Marcus and Maya were sitting up in their beds, wide-eyed but unharmed. Marcus clutched his sister's hand, his gaze fixed on the window. "He's here," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. Eleanor turned toward the window. At first, she saw nothing. But then, just beyond the glass, she saw a figure standing in the shadows of the backyard. The man from the house. He was still watching, as if waiting for her to make the first move. Eleanor's instincts took over. She closed the curtains in one swift motion and knelt by the twins, her voice firm but calm. "Stay here. Don't move, no matter what." She didn't wait for their response. She ran back downstairs, her adrenaline surging. Whoever this man was, she was done running. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, explaining the situation as quickly as she could. "There's someone on my property," she whispered, her voice shaking but determined. "He's been stalking us. Please send someone right away." The operator assured her help was on the way, but Eleanor knew it could be too late by the time they arrived. She grabbed a flashlight and stepped out into the backyard, the cool night air biting at her skin. The yard was eerily quiet, the shadows stretching long across the grass. She swung the flashlight in every direction, her grip on the vase tightening. "Who are you?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the silence. "What do you want?" At first, there was no response. But then, from the far end of the yard, the man stepped forward, his features illuminated by the beam of her flashlight. He wasn't as menacing up close as she had imagined. His face was tired, almost haunted, with lines that spoke of a hard life. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice low but steady. "I'm here to warn you." Eleanor didn't lower the flashlight. "Warn me about what?" He hesitated, glancing toward the house. "About them." Her stomach turned. "Them? You mean the twins?" The man nodded. "They're in danger. You're in danger. But it's not what you think." Eleanor's heart pounded. "Start talking. Now." The man took a step closer, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "My name is Caleb," he began. "I knew Marie. We worked together on something we shouldn't have." She thought she would get away from it, but she was wrong. Eleanor's mind raced. "What are you talking about? What did Marie do?" Caleb's expression darkened. "We were involved with a group. It started as something small, something that seemed harmless. But it wasn't. They manipulate people, use them. And when you try to leave, he trailed off, his meaning clear. Eleanor's legs felt weak. You're saying Marie was running from this group. That's why she sent the kids to me? Caleb nodded. She thought they'd be safe with you, that they wouldn't know to look here. But they always find out. Eleanor's breath hitched. Who are they? What do they want with the kids? Before Caleb could answer, there was a loud bang from inside the house. Eleanor spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. The kids, she cried, running back toward the house. Caleb followed close behind, his voice urgent. It's them. They're here. Eleanor burst through the back door, the sound of her own heartbeat roaring in her ears. She raced upstairs to the twins' room, but when she opened the door, it was empty. Maya, Marcus, she screamed, panic clawing at her chest. They're not gone, Caleb said, stepping into the room behind her. He pointed to the open closet door. They're hiding. Eleanor rushed to the closet, relief flooding her as she found the twins curled up together, their faces pale with fear. It's okay, she whispered, pulling them into her arms. You're safe. I've got you. But the relief was short-lived. Downstairs, the sound of breaking glass echoed through the house. Eleanor's grip on the twins tightened. They won't stop, Caleb said, his voice grim. Not until they get what they want. And what do they want? Eleanor demanded, her fear giving way to anger. Caleb hesitated, his eyes dark. It's not about the kids. It's about what Marie left with them. Something valuable. Something dangerous. Eleanor's stomach sank. She thought of the missing letter, of all the cryptic warnings. What is it? Before Caleb could answer, a figure appeared in the hallway, their face obscured by the shadows. Eleanor's blood ran cold as the person stepped forward, their voice calm but chilling. You've done well to protect them this far, Eleanor, the stranger said. But it's time to give us what we came for. Eleanor took a deep breath, steeling herself. All right, she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Start from the beginning. Eleanor's hand trembled as she placed the photograph on the coffee table in front of her. She couldn't take her eyes off it. The woman in the picture looked younger than Eleanor remembered, with a wide smile that lit up her face and a familiar glint of mischief in her eyes. It was a face Eleanor hadn't seen in nearly 40 years. Her name. Eleanor's voice wavered as she glanced at the children. Her name was Marie, wasn't it? Maya nodded solemnly, her tiny fingers clutching the hem of her shirt. Marcus remained quiet, his gaze fixed on the floor. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, her heart pounding in her chest. The memories came rushing back, uninvited and overwhelming. She and Marie had been close friends once, inseparable during their youth. They'd shared secrets, dreams, and countless moments of laughter. But then something had happened, a falling out so severe that Eleanor had locked it away, refusing to revisit the pain. How do you know about me? Eleanor finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus lifted his head, meeting her eyes for the first time. She told us about you, he said. She said you were her best friend a long time ago. She said you were the kindest person she ever knew. Eleanor's chest tightened. Marie had said that? After all these years, after how things had ended between them, it didn't make sense. But why now? Why would she send you to me? Eleanor pressed, her voice tinged with confusion and unease. Maya's lip quivered, and she looked to her brother as if asking him to speak for her. Marcus hesitated, his small shoulders tensing under the weight of whatever he was about to say. Because she's gone, he said softly. Eleanor froze, her breath catching in her throat. Gone, she repeated, though she already understood. She passed away a few weeks ago, Maya whispered, her voice breaking. She got really sick. Before she died, she told us to come find you. She said you would help us, no matter what. Eleanor felt an ache in her chest, a deep, hollow sadness for the woman she'd once called her closest friend. Marie was gone, and Eleanor hadn't even known. She hadn't had the chance to reconcile, to say goodbye. I'm so sorry, Eleanor said softly, her heart breaking for the children in front of her. They looked so small, so vulnerable, sitting there with tears welling in their big brown eyes. The room fell silent for a moment, the weight of Marie's absence settling heavily over them. Eleanor stared at the photograph again, her mind spinning. "Where have you been staying?" she asked gently, realizing for the first time how alone these children must be. "With a neighbor," Marcus said quietly. "But she said she couldn't take care of us anymore. She said someone else had to." Eleanor frowned. "Don't you have any other family? Aunts, uncles, grandparents?" Maya shook her head. "No one. Mom said it was just us." The realization hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. These children had no one else. They were completely alone in the world. And somehow, Marie had believed Eleanor could step in and fix things. But why? Why her? Eleanor leaned forward, her elbows resting on her knees. Did she tell you anything else? Anything about why she wanted you to find me?" Marcus and Maya exchanged a glance, their silent communication unsettling in its intensity. Finally, Marcus spoke. "She said you'd understand," he said. "She said there was something she needed to tell you, but she didn't have time. She said it was really important." "Important," Eleanor repeated, her brow furrowing. What did she mean by that? Maya reached into her backpack again and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "She wrote this," she said, handing it to Eleanor. "She told us to give it to you." Eleanor unfolded the paper carefully, her hands trembling. The handwriting was unmistakably Marie's, the slanted script bringing back memories of handwritten notes and letters exchanged in their youth. The note was brief, but it sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. Asterisk Eleanor, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I don't have much time, and there's so much I wish I could say. I'm sorry for everything. I need you to take care of Marcus and Maya. They need you more than you know. Please trust me. You're the only one who can help them. And please forgive me, asterisk. Eleanor's eyes blurred with tears as she read the note again. Forgive her? For what? What had Marie been trying to say? As she drove toward Marie's old house, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the empty streets. The house loomed ahead, as eerie as ever, but this time, Eleanor wasn't afraid. She parked a block away and approached on foot, her flashlight in hand. The boards on the windows rattled in the wind, and the front door creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with silence. She retraced her steps from the other night, her flashlight sweeping over the dusty walls. The messages were still there, but they seemed less ominous now, more like breadcrumbs leading her to the truth. She moved methodically through the house, searching every corner, every hidden nook. It wasn't until she reached the attic that she found it. Behind an old trunk, hidden beneath a loose floorboard, was a small weathered box. Her hands shook as she lifted it out, the weight of it solid and real. She pried it open, revealing a stack of documents, a flash drive, and a small silver key. Eleanor flipped through the papers, her stomach churning as she realized what they were. Bank statements, property deeds, and names, so many names. It was a record of everything the group had done, all the people they had exploited and hurt. The flash drive likely held even more evidence. This was what they were after, the proof that could bring them down. She pocketed the key and the drive, her mind racing. But before she could decide her next move, she heard it, a soft creak, the unmistakable sound of footsteps below her. Her heart pounded as she stuffed the box back into the floorboard and pushed the trunk over it. She turned off her flashlight and pressed herself against the wall, straining to hear. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever it was, they were coming for her. She held her breath as the attic door swung open, a beam of light cutting through the darkness. A figure stepped into the room, and Eleanor's blood ran cold. It wasn't Caleb. It was the stranger from her house, the one who had threatened her and the twins. "I knew you'd come back," the man said, his voice calm but cold. "You should have just handed it over." Eleanor's mind raced. She needed to think fast. "It's not here," she blurted out. "I don't know what you're looking for, but it's not here." The man's expression darkened. "Don't lie to me, Eleanor. Marie trusted you. She gave you everything. Now, where is it?" Before she could respond, a sudden commotion erupted downstairs. Shouts, footsteps, the sound of doors slamming. The man cursed under his breath and turned toward the noise, his attention momentarily diverted.